Distancing. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. We'd like to get started on our talk today. This is our How to Run Your Own Career Fair on a Tiny Budget. We are the IGDA Los Angeles chapter. For context here, of course, IGDA is a nonprofit. We know we're coming from a big city, but our focus here today isn't just telling you about what we did in LA. It's trying to figure out how we can adapt this so it can work for more places. We'd like to help you run a career fair, whether it's at your college, whether it's at your local IGDA chapter, or maybe you run your own meetups, jams, other kinds of events. We'd like you to be able to add this to your repertoire of things you can do to serve your community. And so where possible, try to acknowledge some differences of LA compared to some other spaces. The one other note is that the context we were inspired to do this by was the mass layoffs about a year and a half ago in Los Angeles. And so that colored a few of our decisions. We'll kind of mention where that's relevant in a few places. At our high level, you can see here our agenda. We're going to introduce ourselves. We're going to kind of give an overview of the event. We'll talk about some of the challenges or constraints that came from our venue and other factors, our time frame. Talk about what worked, what didn't, major challenges, feedback. And of course, we're hoping we'd have this as a live discussion at GDC. We'll find some way to receive your inputs and share your stories. Some discussion questions I'd like to talk about as a group, and closing remarks. And here's where you can find our chapter online. We are on all of the medias. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, and LinkedIn. To introduce ourselves, I'm the chair of IGDA LA this year. I'm Chris DeLeon. I'm the founder of Home Team Game Dev, a worldwide group where people build games together for practice. If they have questions, they work with me or one of my trainers for help. Outside of that, I'm also our alumni chair for IndieCade.
And I'm David Mullich. I'm secretary on the LA chapter. And currently I am an adjunct professor of game design at the Art Center College of Design. And I'm also director of development at Say Design.
And I'm Dru Erridge. I run a small work-for-hire and consulting shop that's focused on online games called Gamebreaking Studios.
My name's Tiffany Otto. I work full-time with IndieCade, and I'm IGDA LA's treasurer. I work from the business side of things, not the development side of things.
Our event was a career fair. We have a video we'll share for it, the kind of a little highlight walkthrough, just so you can see and visualize what we're talking about for the rest of the talk. We'll switch to that video.
We're here at Industrious Century City, where we'll be hosting our recruiting event today. First, we're going to check in here with our lovely Dru and our volunteer, Quasar. Coming through, over here on our left, we're going to have a lovely snack assortment and Spatial and Walmart's experimental virtual reality unit. As you can see, we have areas where our members can hang out, chat, and see if they want to start something together. Moving down this way, we can see that we have individual tables for recruiters to sit at and see if there's candidates that match up with them. To our left, we have the indie matching area, also known as the Indie Jumble Room, where candidates who have an interest in indie games or creating a new property can see where their skills can interact. We have representatives from WB Games, Acapara Games, and Servios down this hallway. You'll see that we have a ton of lines, and that's actually because we had a really long wait list for this event. And if you follow me back this way, we can head over to the other side of the beautiful Industrious space. Industrious is an amazing co-working space that tends to skew a little older and a little more diverse, which matches up with our pillars of inclusivity and diversity for IGDA corporate. We have a lovely backdrop for taking photos later. And if you follow us through the elevator bank, we'll get to the main conference rooms where recruiters who brought 3 or more representatives have been assigned spaces. These 2 tables are listed as conversation nooks for some of our more indie studios. We have Fox Next Games in this room, as well as Network in this one. In addition, we have TBA Games Inc., and this is our war room for IGDA LA, where our board members can hang out and, sort of handle everything. This room is a soundproof foam room where Jaga from DeWitt Street Accounting is giving one-on-one personal accounting consultations. In addition, we have other conference rooms and conversation nooks where bigger studios such as PlayStation and Respawn can have a more casual situation. So that's basically what we've done with the Industrious space, and we're hoping we can continue this partnership with them because they have several locations in the LA area and they're all amazing.
So I was the events chair at the time that we started this event, planned it, and executed it, which means I was the point person. So when you're making your own event, you need to have a point person. Let's start with that. But what I learned in that process was there's a lot of requirements as dictated by the event. And every event space you find will have these kind of constraints. They might not look identical to ours, but they are going to be there. For example, we could not come in early to prepare. This was okay for us because we didn't need too much setup, but as you'll see later in our challenges, there actually were a couple issues that came from not being able to come in too early. I, as the chair, visited twice, and I had a 20 chain email before I actually, 20 email chain before I actually got a signed contract out of it. And the paperwork was extensive because we did have HQ involved. And by that, I mean IGDA HQ because we're an international organization. So Industrious got 10 minutes to speak to the attendees ahead of time. We gave them a mic in a shared space when we had the first 50 or 60 people in. And it's a pretty standard thank you for hosting the event. It's a chance to advertise. So we got our event for free, but free is free. And what that means is we had to have several agreements with them, such as a credit agreement and a social media agreement. Often in your space, if they're donating it, regardless of your nonprofit status, they'll want their collateral in the major space. Industrious signage had to be prominent in all of our marketing materials, as well as like things such as name tags, signage. And when we put the video together later, we had to show their logo quite a bit. In addition, Industrious offered 5 days of free co-working on a postcard, and everyone was going to receive that in their gift at the end. They did end up distributing that via email later. We ended up not printing out the collateral because we just didn't have time. There wasn't enough bandwidth on our team at that time. But physical stuff is important. Digital stuff is hard to redeem. No one actually redeems the digital certificates. We highly recommend physical envelopes that people can take home later. Gifts help our partners, the people that partner with you, whether you get a big sponsor such as Amazon, or if you get a local sponsor such as a catering place, having them put small gift certificates is a form of PR and marketing, so you can add value to your non-paying sponsors and get them to give you in-kind donations, even without a 501c3 or 501c6 space. So, for example, Jaga, the accountant who runs DeWitt Street LLC, he does the accounting consultations. I hate to say this phrase, but exposure was his main value add there. He actually ended up getting multiple people calling him from that event. He used specialty business cards that were printed in a different style so that when he asked people how they heard of him, they actually referenced our event. He got paying work out of it, and to quote him, that paid for me getting the cards printed and coming to the event. Talk to your sponsors and your partners about what their goals and values are, because that'll help you craft something that's necessary for them as opposed to you.
Part of why a co-working space was such a great fit as to appeal is that IGDA necessarily is bringing in a bunch of people, many of whom are freelance people who do development and might use a co-working space, new companies getting started who might use that as a stepping stone towards an office, and very much that we could potentially say, hey, we're going to bring you dozens of people who will get to know your space, your parking, your environment, your location in the city, help make that a value add to them to offer the space for free. It was a good match.
And if you want to make it even more polished and professional, one thing we actually did is on our entry survey, when people signed up to attend the career fair, there was a yes/no question. I'm interested in hearing more about co-working. And everyone who clicked yes on that, we curated into a list and gave to Industrious as part of our agreement. We'll talk more about privacy agreements later, but everyone knew exactly what they were signing up for when they checked that box. That was a real value add for Industrious because for them, it was warm leads of people who already were interested in co-working, a customized value add. This is how you look more professional, even if you can't pay for things. Going on to the venue budget, one of my coworkers will talk about that.
I think the general theme here is working with the venue. There's a lot of different things that we did to try and make sure that we were meeting their needs, meeting our attendees' needs. So some of the constraints that I think we mentioned some of them already. They wanted to make sure that they didn't have too many people in the space. They're obviously for venues like that, especially in LA, they can get a lot of money to have an event of a certain size. So there's a bunch of different things that we had to consider and ended up needing to cap the amount of people that we let in, things like that, and we ended up with a wait list. There are a lot of other options that we could have taken here, though, that I definitely would think about next time, about rolling people in over time. Could we potentially have 2 different start times for different groups of people so that we keep the event to have under fire code and all of these things, just different ways to kind of work within different constraints like that. A great framing exercise to use is, this is a free career fair. All you have to pay is this one email that you're going to get from our venue. Is that okay with you? And I think nobody likes to get spam, but if you look about the cost value trade-off there of one email versus getting to have a potential career opportunity, that feels pretty strong to people. And then there's a number of other constraints in there as well, like the timing and like at what time could we be in the venue and for how long. All these things, we just kind of looked at it and tried to do our best with LA traffic. How do we start the venue late enough, but not too late, so that there's still staff on site at the venue and things like that.
Feeling that traffic pattern thing, a thing to keep in mind, right, is especially for a game industry career fair, a lot of people are going to game industry career fairs. It's not that they don't have a job, it's that they're trying to shift into a game industry job. And so because of that, it's not like, oh, I can do it in the middle of the day. Their time is necessarily flexible. We were trying to account for enough time. They could get out of their work, they could get home, they could change into their nice clothes, get their business cards, still make it out. And one of our concerns we're always on the lookout for, well, you don't want your event to skew too late. At the same time, if you do it too close to the end of the workday, people will look at that and say, I would miss the whole first 45 minutes, or I would only get the tail end of it. I'm just going to skip it. And so those kind of logistics were part of our factoring in there, alongside, of course, the venue's constraints of when we could be allowed in.
As the treasurer, one thing I don't know if we've made clear yet is we ran this off an impact grant from headquarters. IGDA HQ has a program where if you're doing something that positively impacts the local game dev community, and they have a list on their website that's very clear, it's very simple, we have to positively impact the community with this money. And that's how we got the money to run this. This was not a free event to run. A lot of people told us, well, it should be easy to run a free event, get people to donate stuff. And you'd be surprised at how difficult that was. We did have to take on exterior funding.
It can still be a low budget, but a no budget seems unlikely to really, for that matter, meet people's needs of pulling off a professional seating event. So some things that did work great for us. Really curious to, David, hear your takes on the ways that you were a connection to a lot of the studios who showed up in terms of the people you reached out to, how they were able to make it. Can you speak a bit to that process, what those communications were like?
One thing that's really helpful is to have a lot of connections in the game industry. Even before you think about running a game fair, just for you personally, it helps to know as many people as possible. And one thing that I've always done is try to make contact with all the recruiters in the game industry, all the executive recruiters that work independently, as well as with all the recruiters that work on each of the different studios. So when we started talking about having a job fair, what I did was go through all my contacts that I had already made long ago, and gone to each of them to find out if they were interested in participating. So that sort of preparation that I had done just in case I'd ever come a time where I was employed, I already had people to reach out to. That gave me preparation for this career fair, being able to reach out to people that we could invite to be to appear and be vendors at our game fair to help out other people. I went and started contacting them a few weeks ahead of the event, and one thing that I discovered that would have worked better is if we had established a date even sooner. As different venues we looked at became available, and then it turns out we couldn't use that venue and another available. The date kept switching, so that made it hard to arrange recruiters to come in and studios to come in. We were able to give like 4 weeks notice.
Oh, wow.
Most of the people I talked to were actually very, very interested in showing up. I think recruiters do like having
the audience award.
Opportunities to go and meet people, because that's really what they're in the business for, to find out possible people to join their companies. So they do look forward to having events like this.
A couple things I think we maybe didn't even organize till after was realizing each of us in the IGDA LA board have different connections to industry, and we kind of built out a spreadsheet of who knows people in which places in the area. And even that's become a useful resource to us for future kind of things to realize, okay, well, we need some people who are VR in the area or AAA or indie or otherwise in the area, kind of realizing just how useful it is. And that's the thing where if some people who are watching this talk are like, well, I don't have those connections, this sounds like an easy cop-out for IGDA people to say, go to your IGDA events. There are chapters all over the place, and there's necessarily a congregation of people who have different connections, the Venn diagram of which might surprise you of just how many different places someone can find somebody who, again, these recruiters, when you can invite them to these kind of events, it's doing their companies a favor in terms of they want to find people who are looking for work, who are a good match for them, and you're helping make that match happen.
Yeah, Such an
Really helpful for making connections is LinkedIn. You can go in on LinkedIn and find the in-house recruiters working at just about every given studio. And I've not met one recruiter online that wasn't more than willing to accept my LinkedIn connection. So that's part of how I build up my own network.
Yeah, their job is almost accepting LinkedIn connections some of the time.
Yeah.
Which is actually, so building off of what David said, we did have a bit of a chicken and egg problem. People and companies both only wanted to show up if there were people they expected to have a positive impact or that they wanted to impress on the thing. So when we were like, hey, studio name, do you want to be at our career fair? Like, well, how many mid-grade engineers do you have? And I'm like, I can get back to you with that. And then when we started advertising the career fair, we didn't really hit the high end of that curve of signups until we started putting known entities and like names people had heard of, whether that was a local, local indies that everyone had heard of, or AAA studios on the list. As soon as we dropped 2 AAA names on the list, like our Eventbrite just got loaded out. So that's a chicken and egg problem. And this is where we say like collab with a local IGDA chapter.
If I can speak to, there's a point in there too, and maybe it sounds obvious when said out loud, is basically if you have some friends, some places that you're more connected to that you can ask first and get some yeses first. It's very tough to get people to be the first person to a party. If you have a little bit of traction, we have 3 other studios who've said yes, we have 4 other studios who've said yes, it's that much easier for someone to see like, oh, this is a legitimate thing, people will be there, it's happening. So it's before you approach the strangers who you only met on LinkedIn yet, it's useful to first try to leverage what you can from your in-persons connections through however you're finding them.
Yeah, and David made a really good point about being able to parse the data of early attendees to invite companies of different sizes. If you realize you're getting like a bunch of mid-level audio guys responding, then you start targeting your studios appropriately. We're very fortunate. We're not, LA, New York, any of the Nordics. You can grab your local industry. So you'll be surprised who you can pull in depending on where you are.
And I will speak to, I think some folks probably who are in these areas know this. I grew up in the Midwest, and one of the things that happens out there is that the few meetups and events in cities and hubs that would hold events, people would drive from 3 hours in every direction to be at that thing to find the other people who are in their region. Now, granted, they might also be driving 3 hours of LA traffic, but it's the other side of LA. But so like just because you're not in where there's a major city hub, you might surprise yourself on the people who will fly out to your thing, etc., to make it happen.
Like all the things that we've talking about at this point are just like, what are the value adds for different groups, right? We don't have a lot of money to bring to the table to just pay people for this. So what's in it for the venue? What's in it for the attendees? What's in it for the the candidates and the recruiters? So those 3 sides of it, and a lot of this stuff is around So we know that our recruiters are looking for candidates. One of the ways we can answer some of those questions, even from our early signups, is making sure that whatever signup sheet we have, we're collecting as much information as we can, as long as it feels relevant to people. So we did go ahead and put in as much information as we could about, like, please tell us what sort of job you're looking for. What do you consider yourself? How many years have you been in the industry? So we can start to answer these questions when we ask a AAA studio, hey, would you like to come to our event? And they ask, well, how many mid-level artists do you have or hire? And we're like, okay, we have 5 artists on our sign-up sheet already, and we expect it to grow as we put more studios on there. This is kind of always a thing when you're talking to any kind of other organization, but like if you could start the conversation asking them what it is that they're looking for before you start asking them for things, it gives you lots of opportunity to be like, okay, well, we want this, and I think we can give you X, Y, and Z of the things that you already mentioned.
My favorite phrase and the most polite way to say this is, so what does success look like for you? How can we facilitate your goals?
Absolutely.
Yeah, use those exact words.
Use those exact words, like steal them. And then David, I think you had some information about how the social spaces worked and sort of that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, what really worked in the social spaces were snacks, especially gamers love food. So yes, snacks are really helpful. But the key thing is without serving alcohol, which would have been a really bad fit for a professional interview setting. So we were lucky that our host, Industrious, provided the beverages. Also chose non-alcoholic to keep the insurance costs down, which would have been $10,000 for the event space. So you have to account for event insurance, especially whenever alcohol is served. And co-working spaces do come with their own liability insurance already. So that's great if you're holding it at a co-working space. If you're holding it at a game studio, you have to make sure that they have liability insurance as well. IGDA HQ insurance doesn't cover your event because their stuff covers only things like E3 and such. So you have to make sure that all of your insurance is covered. Anyway, getting back to snacks. As much as gamers like snacks, they were good to have, they do provide good opportunities for social interaction. You know, people go and gather around the snack bowl and such, and it really make it easier for those people that don't normally socialize well, especially since we didn't have alcohol there. So even though they didn't eat a lot of snacks, the snacks were still a good way to get people talking together. And we also found that the recruiters hung around the snack tables. And by doing so, they were able to initiate conversations with the various attendees and start building up those important social contacts.
There was one company, they brought 6 people, I believe, to represent their company. They had 3 people in the room looking through resumes while people did their one-on-one, like, hi, my name is Jenny Job Hunter, and I like visual effects. And they actually had 3 people sort of incognito, for lack of a better term, hanging out by the snack table and the fizzy water dispenser, just making connections. And they actually told me during their exit, because I did an exit chat with each of them, they're like, yeah, we took every resume that came in, and then we hunted down some people that didn't come in by talking outside. Because it was, you know, they were doing the professional thing as well as the casual thing. Speaking of the professional thing, adding a professional veneer or sheen to your event is a major key for getting those high impact triple or AA or triple I studios to take you seriously next time. And by next time, I mean the next time you do this, because you're going to be so successful. You're going to have like 4 of these. We found that making the staff wear the same shirt, ideally with a logo, is a major key. I know everybody hates uniforms in our industry and everyone hates suits, and I totally understand that. But it made it super easy for people to say, go find Tiffany. She's the girl in all black with a name tag on. I wish I had an IGDA branded shirt so that I could wear that. And they said, go find one of the people in an IGDA shirt. That's a major thing. It makes it more comfortable for people, easier to find out who to ask questions of. And you got to remember, like, especially for your venue staff, they don't know who you are. They don't hang out with you. We didn't have shirts printed, so we all wore black t-shirts and blazers. Considering it's gaming, the blazer was a major delineator, and I highly recommend it, even though we're in gaming and we all natively dislike blazers as part of our career choices. It makes your staff stand out, and that's what you want. Looking legitimate during your meetings, having your point person wear a blazer, even if you don't wear a blazer in life, or like a black long sleeve that's, you know, not faded out and doesn't have a weird game logo on it, is a great way to work with people who don't normally work in the gaming space, such as co-working spaces, beverage vendors, etc. It's a non-endemic brands like that veneer of professionalism, because when you're in non-gaming spaces, you're competing with companies like Pepsi or Coke or Uber or like tech companies and people who have a lot more budget and finance than you. And then, Chris, you had some points about documentation, right?
Documenting the space was one of my focuses. I'm always trying to document our events to help not just show that we're doing things, but to really make a case for next year, being able to visualize it really clearly. That's why we made that short video about kind of capturing what happened there. Help secure the venue next year. The recruiters, attendees, helping them see what they're getting themselves into. We had a couple companies who sent recruiters and were kind of confused because they misunderstood the nature of the event. Even having a 2-minute long video showing this is what it is, here's what's going on here, will help you get a right fit between people who what they're looking for and showing up. They were still happy they were there, but they were kind of caught off guard. Legally, by the way, at least comes from our headquarters, it is important to explicitly tell people that they will be videoed or photoed or otherwise documented. It's required to document things, at least in the state of California. Your laws may vary. Depending on your venue or who you're partnering with, that may already be covered as part of their agreement in using that space. That's something where I wound up doing that this time. I've got some equipment for other professional uses. We did, unfortunately, learn the hard way that you should not go into a photography community if you do not have a photographer to advise you on the rate you should try to suggest to try to get help from someone who's professional in that space. Obviously, good photography is a expensive thing in a budget, and when you're running a low-cost event, it might be what equipment you and your other volunteers can scramble with. I would encourage not just using a smartphone. That said, smartphones are not terrible, and use both hands if you do.
Yes, or you can find a relatively cheap gimbal online. All the streamers have them these days. Or borrow them from your friend who has way too much photo gear. That's what I do. Speaking of specialized things like photo gear, so we did something a little unique with our career fair, and this is because we had people who were coming in from a layoff. So we looked at it more like a layoff workshop instead of just a career fair. We got Jaga, who's somebody I know. He runs DeWitt Street LLC. It's an accounting consultancy firm, to come and give one-on-one advice for anyone who signed up for completely confidential accounting advice for free. A couple people talked to him. One person seriously talked to him, but no one took advantage of his services on site, which means our attendees were a little bit foolish, in my opinion, because a lot of them ended up calling him and he's like, yeah, now you've got to pay. It's tax season. What we learned from that is that was a miscommunication on our part, mine as the event chair and us as a chapter. We should have explained more of what he was offering. You need to sell the good stuff. We fall into this trap of good things will sell themselves. They don't. Good marketing sells all sorts of things. So moving forward and for next time, we would definitely highlight the value add of this kind of thing that you wouldn't expect at a career fair.
So how do you staff an event like this? Obviously, you're going to work with what you have, and the more the merrier with volunteers. But specifically, the things that we found were, obviously, there's going to be a huge rush of people at registration. You can never have enough people checking folks in, and that's a great place to have volunteers. But pretty much anywhere you're assigning volunteers, you want to make sure that one of the coordinators, one of the people who is there organizing the event, is nearby, so they have someone to kind of escalate to. Because obviously, they're not going to have the answer to all the questions. They just kind of showed up as an extra pair of hands, usually. The other thing was, there tends to need to be somebody that's floating around, checking in with each of these groups of people and making sure all of their needs are being met. So checking in with the venue, like, hey, everything's looking good, et cetera, checking with different recruiters and can we get you anything, et cetera, especially the recruiters are kind of locked down at tables sometimes. So if you can help them out as someone who's a little more mobile, then that can be great. And just checking in with attendees and, making sure somebody's getting a feel for if people are, having any troubles, that you can fix something. Even if it's like, it's too hot in here, you can go ask the venue to turn the AC on or whatever it is, Having people floating around in different capacities is really helpful. One of the things we found is we have a venue that was really actually well set up for this, where we could put people into these phone booths. But a venue like that is really distributed, and where do we, how do we tell people to get around? So as soon as they come in, again, lack of signage, but as soon as they come in, they're like, what do I do now? And we're like, well, there are companies in all of these rooms there and all of these rooms there. So having a person to basically air traffic control the humans around the room and into different places. The other thing that we could have done there is maybe like, if we really knew the venue ahead of time, a little bit more printed materials as you walk in. Here's a map, like you'd see at a conference or something like that.
And some of that was, of course, since we were at a co-working space where if we didn't tell people that, some of them might have been worried about, like, is that just other people who are having a meeting in that room that aren't related to this event? Part of what's neat about that same dynamic of you're not taking over 100% of a space makes it potentially like, okay, say you're a college organization running it on a campus, you can't lock down that whole building. You're going to get maybe a few classrooms or whatever. You can still have people there, kind of direct people like, oh, don't go to this hallway. We're all up and down this wall over here. And so you can have a space without having the whole space, and it opens up your options for where you could be and how flexible your growth can be as well.
And on the note that Chris was just talking about, when we have lots of people in sort of a mixed use space, making sure that everyone had a name tag was important beyond just sort of the facilitation piece. It's really kind of a security thing, making sure you know who's a part of your event, making sure they know who's a part of your event, so that they're not, reaching out to people who are actively working at a desk when we're at a co-work space or something like that.
And I will say, as well as those name tags are also potentially part of, it's valuable to have an anti-harassment policy or similar types of things documented that can be up on little trifolds around tables or whatnot. Something we did not do this year, want to improve for future events. But basically, sometimes we'll get resistance from someone saying, oh, I don't feel like wearing a name tag. It is important for being able to hold people accountable for someone's misbehaving, someone's doing something they shouldn't do, to be able to at least have some way to tell who was who. And that's an important part of that policy. Yeah,
that was all our kind of prep stuff. But there's actually a bunch of like prep that you want your attendees and recruiters to be doing as well. It's obvious things like reminding people to bring their resumes and their business cards. And it seems very obvious. but the better prepared the people that come in are, the better your event is going to seem. It's because your audience, especially we've talked about this, your audience is your value here too, because this is kind of like recruiters looking for attendees and venues looking for people to work there. So if everyone's professionalism is higher, your event looks better. So help prep them. I think David was going to talk about some of the other lessons learned for the next time we run an event like this.
Some stuff that didn't work.
Yeah. One thing I think we wish we had done was request from each studio a high-res logo so that we could put it on our signage. Would have made a lot better looking signage than what we had. One thing that we thought would have worked out well is that we had an interview room that we called the phone booth that had soundproofing in it. And that way it allowed people to have private interviews. But it's turned out that nobody really took us up on it because it wasn't well communicated that we had that. And then what we should have done is for our survey, we should have used the survey in Eventbrite rather than having a separate Google link.
Things we could improve upon and that didn't work. We had some individuals, some sort of career coach types, offer to come and do resume reviews. And so there's a question on the sign-up form that was, would you like your resume reviewed by a professional resume reviewer? About 40% of people said, yeah, we would like that. That sounds like an exceptional thing. I just got laid off. That vendor didn't show up. We haven't heard from them since. I hope nothing terrible happened to them, but they didn't come through. They didn't come to the event. Fortunately, I was running point on this event. So when the people got here who signed up for resume review, as you could see on their name tag, which had 1,000 stickers on it, I apologized to them. I said, our resume reviewer didn't arrive. Can I interest you in one of our other specialty products? And they didn't remember signing up that they wanted resume review. People often say they want things and not actually know what that means or not actually want it at the end of the day. How you can account for that, I'm not sure. Just remember that not everything people say they want is what they want. And sometimes things they don't say they want, they decide they want when they get there.
Yeah, I'll say to that point, of one thing that can be done to mitigate it is essentially that if it's something that feels like a key value add for our event is really relying on, we're really pointing out like, come get VR work or come get your resume reviewed or whatever, to basically try to build in some redundancy, thinking of it more as a panel approach, less as a single point of failure. Just because part of what we figured out is just as much as not every attendee who says they're going to come shows up, not every studio or service who says they're going to come show up either. And so building around that as an assumption from the beginning of like, if this is a key value to what we're doing, how can we make sure we have 3 lawyers present or whatever? And if we can't, then not wanting to overemphasize that in the messaging as to why people should be here, or they show up and they're upset. If the only AAA company that was supposed to be there doesn't show up, you get mad people if you don't have any other sort of backup plan in that risk mitigation sort of strategy.
Yes. Speaking of people who didn't show up, Chris can talk about our LinkedIn coaching.
Yeah, we were also hoping to have some LinkedIn critiques for the same reason as our resume reviews. And like the resume reviews, the LinkedIn coach did not show up. Fortunately, we scrambled a little bit and created the Indie Scramble, realizing that some of the people there are really, they're open to, they're exploring studio work, they're exploring jobs out there, but also they're open to the idea of finding collaborators, getting their own thing rolling out here, maybe meeting with our accountant, get some financial advice, we would hope next year. But what we did was we created that space, we set aside, I don't remember if it was an hour or two, and basically tried to invite people to be like, hey, if you want to meet other potential collaborators, other indies in the area, go be in this room, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. or whatever we made it. And during that time, we tried to encourage them to go around and introduce themselves, really trying to structure it to be that it's less about what happens in that one event and more about trying to forge some connections so they might follow up after the fact of like, oh, you're also in mobile. We should touch base on, is there some way we can connect each other? Is there some way we can collaborate? Have you learned some lessons that can apply to our marketing and vice versa? We did have some people who kind of took over the room in sort of a show and tell format. It would have been probably useful to have had a facilitator had we planned this event from the beginning and not been a last minute improvisation to help kind of coordinate, make sure the time's evenly, fairly distributed, or some people who are a little more talkative might kind of take things over. That said, for a last minute shift, it kind of worked out all right as an improvised thing. So if you do wind up with some empty space, not sure what to do, if you create kind of a structured conversation, say audio room, freelancers room, whatever, you can at least make some of those connections and create a space for them to feel like it's okay to hand out their business cards there if that's what they do. It's a kind of decent way to improvise when you have vendors not necessarily coming through for you.
Yeah, speaking of vendors, we had a little bit of difficulty getting them to do exit interviews afterwards. I did minor ones with each company that I caught, but I'd say about a third of the companies kind of snuck out the back without saying goodbye. But I wish I had scheduled straight up like 1 hour video calls with a rep from each studio for the week after to, get more qualitative data. I also wish we'd done that for attendees to get better numbers on, like, did you get paired with a studio that ended up with a job? Because the best metric for a career fair is how many jobs did people get out of it. And we only have soft data, not hard data on that. Having said that, several vendors dropped out last second, so our numbers are a little skewed in that space. And I think part of that's due to the way we handle the Eventbrite. And I believe, David, you have more info on that, right?
Yeah. One thing we had done is we had used the corporate version instead of our personal Eventbrite. Because obviously one thing is that we wouldn't have had to reinvent the wheel if we had done that. We also missed out on the opportunity for collecting donations. Also using IGDA HQ's Eventbrite would have reduced, if we had decided to charge for tickets, it would have reduced any additional fees that would have been charged to attendees.
And so that's like on the digital prep, as David was saying, but on the physical prep side, which Dru's covered a little bit before, it ended up being very heavy manual prep the day of, which I did not account for as the chair on this event. The big thing was stickers on name tags. I know this sounds absolutely ridiculous, but we blew hours manually sticking stickers on name tags to indicate the disciplines a candidate was working in. I'd like to point out the reason we're talking so much about stickers is the value add of the stickers to both the attendees and the vendors. A lot of the vendors said, like, the studios, they were like, oh, it was great. I could, stare around the room and see, oh, they're here for VR, they're here for audio, and they could start up conversations based on the info on the name tags. What that told us is like, okay, we do need to do these stickers. Do we have them do it at the door when they sign in? That was already a bottleneck. Where do we want our bottleneck? Prepping on the front end or prepping day of? We used an Avery template because it was free, which is our favorite word. We bought the name tags at a local office supplies chain and downloaded the Avery template and just plugged and chugged everything in from Eventbrite. There's an extension that Eventbrite uses to make it quite easy to do that. Applying your own stickers was an option for next year, but the professionalism would have been less because we actually had set spots on the tags that each sticker could go, almost gridded out. And it's a bottleneck all over the place. There were a lot of bottlenecks with sign in, and we're concerned about adding to that because it was we didn't plan for that bottleneck at sign in. And I think, Chris, you have more information about unplanned bottlenecks.
Yeah, we kind of spoke earlier about some of our improv events. In general, organic, unplanned. If you just kind of leave like, oh, there's couches open and it'll go okay, maybe not. There are some people who sort of professionally are charismatic. Your producers, your professional socializers, your recruiters, people who just are comfortable with conversations. For a lot of other folks, and this is true across, we find some of our IGDA meetups too, it can be helpful to have some sort of other focal point structure, topic card. We've run some other events where we just put cards on tables of things to discuss for a certain time and swap those out. Or we've had board games sometimes at our events where people are able to use those as just something to do. Maybe not the right thing for a professional career fair, but figuring out some way to structure the conversation. I think that's part of why we had a little more success in the Indie Scramble room than maybe some of our other improvised, open-ended spaces. Some of that might be part of your industry, although I think our stickers actually did probably help us there too. Whereas an easy conversation starter to be like, oh, you're also an audio person, or oh, good, I actually need an artist. And it helped save the kind of moment of introduction.
Run it like people don't know how to socialize as well as you think they do, because our industry can be a little awkward sometimes.
They're stressed out and nervous, and they're not used to wearing a suit. And
and it's awkward to try and sell yourself. It's much easier to sell somebody else. Like, oh, my friend Jenny is amazing at 3D modeling. You need to see her portfolio is way easier than being like, I make really good pitch decks, I swear. Like, it's helpful that way. And then, David, you had more information on our major challenges, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Big challenges, don't only have to consider the job seekers to make your event attractive for, but you also have to make it attractive for hiring companies. So if they really want to come to your event, and getting the big studios to show up proved to be a challenge. I thought it'd be a lot easier because I had a lot of connections that I knew personally that I could invite. By the way, if you don't know connections to invite, what you should do is partner with your local IGDA chapter. And that's the sort of thing they love to do. They love sharing their connections, and they can help you put in touch. But even though that we personally knew a lot of connections, and we contacted AAA studios, and a lot of them had confirmed that they would show up, none of them actually did. And there might have been reasons for that. Maybe we didn't give them enough notice. Maybe it was because a lot of them were personal connections, and unfortunately I was traveling at the time we had we had the event, so I wasn't able to follow up with them. It might have been that they realized they didn't have positions they really needed to seek at the time. Maybe they had other things coming up. We don't know exactly why they didn't, but it unfortunately was a little bit embarrassing for us because we wanted to be able to promote that we had these great studios that would be there, and we weren't able to fulfill on that. So it was a little bit embarrassing that we booked and set up rooms for them, and they didn't appear. But anyway, lesson learned that we need to follow up better. We should have had them sign a form, stay in contact with them, and really keep on top of everyone who had RSVP to make sure that they were going to show up.
I would add on the other side of that, from the giant studios, the small to medium-sized studios, a few I was impressed who basically, at a giant studio, like you said, they might not need a specific type of job right now that they see us as bringing out in the demographic. The small, medium-sized studios, a number of them kind of came out and said, we just want to get to know who's in our area. Because sometimes they're small enough, they're flexible enough, they're adaptable enough, they might realize that once they find someone who's really good at a certain type of talent, it can change what they're doing in a way that the bigger company might have kind of already, its plans are pretty locked in place. So that was actually a neat dynamic. We have a couple of studios, I think TBA Games might have been one of them, who were there basically to, well, let's talk about your resume. We're not trying to waste anybody's time, but we're not specifically hiring for any particular role. But get on our radar, because any given time, we don't know what contract work we're spinning up. And then they want to have access to those people in their community. And I think it was actually surprising flexibility from the small studios that kind of I hadn't expected going into it. So
don't discount smaller mid-sized studios. Everyone wants to work at, Epic or Sony or Nintendo, but don't, forget the medium or little guys, the studios that have like less than 15 employees, because there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, I mean, from that angle, I run a work for hire shop, and we have that exact problem all the time. It's like, I have no idea what the next contract is going to be. I might need 9 contractors across the entire spectrum of game development to get moving. And so just having those contacts and knowing that there's people out there looking or freelancing or what have you, extremely, extremely valuable for me as a small business owner.
Speaking of value, funding, money, yay, I'm a treasurer. That's what I talk about. Funding the event is, part of why you're here. We've talked about our pitfalls. Now I got to talk about our fiscal pitfalls. A career fair charges companies at a table rate generally between $1,000 and $5,000 US for a 3x6 Costco table. But to be fair, you got to fund these things somehow. That's how they make money. That's how these things like pay for stuff like insurance and snacks and name tags. We used an impact grant. An impact grant, it's from IGDA headquarters, and every chapter can use up to 1,000 of it a year. It has to impact the community. On screen, you'll see the requirements headquarters has for it. It could cover everything from printing name tags to snacks to possibly subsidizing parking, as long as it's part of something that positively impacts the community. The vast majority of IGDA chapters don't use theirs, and that includes SIGs. So it's not just like LA or Norway. It can be like Latinx in gaming, esports, like whatever. It's use it or lose it money. And so this isn't supposed to be an ad for the IGDA, by the way. This is not what this is. But what we found is our infrastructure that we've had as being part of IGDA has really underpinned a lot of the stuff we could have done, as opposed to 4 people trying to make this happen in a corner. So pair with your chapter. There's one basically everywhere. Finding a venue that would take us for free was an exercise in cold calling. I personally really actively dislike cold calling. It's uncomfortable. I'm bad at socializing. I don't like it. I got 1 response out of 65 calls. I thought co-working spaces would be useful. I thought that public libraries would be useful. Both of those wanted to charge me $3,000 to $5,000 for the space. And maybe the library thing's just an LA thing, but I didn't realize you had to rent your library. I thought my taxes paid for that. Apparently that's not true. I tried with friends in nice work buildings. They had security issues and stuff. They couldn't handle it. Restaurants needed a buyout. I was like, can we just use your space when no one's in here? You can keep serving food to everyone else, but can we just take like 10 tables in the corner? And they were like, no, you need to buy us out for $5,000 plus the cost of food. And I was like, well, that's not happening. The local women's club had a venue. They also wanted a buyout. The LGBT YMCA wanted a buyout as well. Every community center wanted a buyout. And I understand everyone's got to make money somehow. But it was really surprising to me how many venues required a buyout. I had to call individual locations. So a lot of things, whether it's your WeWorks, your Spaces, your Industrious, or your The Wings, they have an HQ and they also have individual chapters. HQ for every single organization I called said no, bar none. Every single one of them said no. I actually ended up using Google Maps to find the local phone numbers of my local co-working branches. 2 of Industrious's branches said yes, specific to location. I went to a local Chamber of Commerce meeting with the city of Santa Monica, and I met someone who's the head of programming for the local Santa Monica WeWork chapter. Now, I know WeWork's not everyone's favorite right now, but they do have big spaces. That gentleman was shocked. He's like, what do you mean we said no? And I'm like, I called you, you said no. And he's like, are you kidding me? This is exactly the kind of event we want to host in our big communal spaces. And I'm still in contact with them for another event with another organization I work with. So HQ saying no doesn't always mean no, because the local chapters have more flexibility in certain things. Also, think outside of your game dev network. You don't have to use the canteen at a studio. Speaking of things we need to run the career fair, Drew, do you want to talk more about actual like logistics once you find the space?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of equipment concerns about obtaining venues and obtaining equipment at venues. Obviously, for a lot of career fairs, it's tables. It might be signage. It might be a variety of things. And I think this is one of those things where you got to understand which things you're most constrained by. If you have a budget, there are a lot of places that are set up with facilities to handle this. If you go ask a hotel, they will tell you what their rental prices are. They'll give you a sheet this long. If you go ask a college, they have a facilities department. They'll give you a rental sheet of things that are this long. Usually they're pretty expensive, but I mean, know which things that are your constraints. If you are trying to find a venue that you're trying to save money, et cetera, again, it comes down to like, how can I help those people, or who can I partner with that's sort of on the inside? At a college, this is usually like, I need a professor to sponsor me, or I need a student group who's really invested, because those people are usually able to obtain classrooms or gymnasiums or whatever for free.
We had tried to do this thing 3-4 years ago. There used to be a startup out here on the west side of LA that they had monthly meetups from meetup.org out there. They loved, like, basically, they wanted people to know where they were, their brand, what they did, to know their people. And again, that would have been great. They're unfortunately no longer out there. But that really does come from figuring out, okay, who wants to be on that map? Who wants those kind of connections? Somebody, potentially. But this is something where you have to have a high expected failure rate. This is a thing, obviously, it's equally true for the people out there applying for jobs. It's part of the discouraging process if they are applying for 10 or 20 to get maybe 1 or 2 or 3 options to hopefully consider. And that, this is something where a lot of our people that we work with are coming from maybe engineering disciplines or some other field where if you do the right steps, the algorithm computes, you get the end result, or you ace the math assignment. This is fundamentally a business operation, so it's going to be low yield. And that if you're doing 65 calls and getting a few yeses, that's great. And there's no shortcut to that besides getting really used to the rejection. And to point out, like, again, that doesn't mean you're failing at it. Doesn't mean you're doing everything wrong. That's part of the process if you're trying to operate on a low budget, of that budget's translating to legwork instead of capital you're able to invest in a known quantity, like a hotel establishment or paying for a college space you don't have a direct in at.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of business, because I come in from the business people doing business side of things. Here's some tips that I know from my space that might help people who aren't from that space. Don't use words like unemployment or laid off when you're trying to get a space. People don't really like hearing that. It's not an appealing demographic. You have to sell the venue on yourself and your organization before your thing. The venue wants to know our demographics. What percentage of your people are well, they didn't know to use the word engineers, but they literally said, can you give us a demographic breakdown of the people in your organization? Make sure you can define it before you go in and talk about your target demographics. It's not just people who make games. Frame it as a business and use business language for product market fit. Creative entrepreneurs is a good word for indies. Lean startups is a great name for two-man studios. It's not about what the things are. It's about how they're presented that count. An example we use and why industrious liked us is like, oh, we skew high male, but compared to our industry average, we're actually quite diverse. You show a state of comparison between two things. People love that. Largely mid-20s, has college degrees. Like the way you can slice and dice your people, the more ways you can slice and dice it and the way you can present said slicing and dicing will really assist you in getting what you need. And then David, you were talking more about, trying to get free stuff and how to market it and all that.
Yeah, well, particularly getting the venues, because only until you actually have a place you're going to hold the event can you really get people to agree to actually come to it. So the venue is probably the most important thing of all. And, everyone says they know somebody, they know someplace. It's real easy. I have a place I know I can get a free venue at, but when it really comes down to it, it's really tough. As Tiffany just said, she made over 60 calls and nobody wanted to do it. Even despite dangling the little carrot of, because we're a nonprofit, they might save as much as like $3,000 off their taxes, that still wasn't able to do it. I went and I looked at a number of different restaurants that we could hold it at, but the noise level was too high, I thought, for holding meetings and holding interviews. And some of the foot traffic was really poor. People getting in and out, that's something you really have to consider, the flow of the people within the place. A lot of people say that, we can hold it at a university or a college. Easier said than done. It turns out universities book their spaces way in advance, and we tried a number of them and we weren't lucky. Also, there's tremendous parking problems often at universities. You really have to consider your venue first. Consider such things as who you know, who you can contact. Get a lot of advance notice, because places get booked up very early. No matter what you think about what type of place you're holding it at, as much advance notice for booking things in is really helpful. Consider how people are going to move, where you're going to set up stations, and parking.
Yeah, two quick notes on that are, for one thing, one of the reasons why the university is so important to have that connection, like was said earlier, kind of a professor's pet project, is that anytime companies are coming onto a college campus, that college campus wants to charge those companies. That's part of how they operate on. They're accessing their students and their essentially clients and so on. And so that's where it needs to be, like we said, sort of an in over there. In terms of snacks, another thing to keep in mind, and we did not do this in this case, but I remember a few years back, some small, I think it was a game jam or whatever, hit up my small company at the time I was just getting started out to sponsor their snacks, which okay, the thing is, if you try to hit up a giant company, they're not going to hand you snack money. A small company was like, yeah, I can spare $50 or $100 on snacks, which is not a bunch of money to even a beginning company, but it felt cool to get my name on there. You might be surprised. Again, it's like the people who show up sometimes, the small companies, the approval is the only person you're talking to. And they're like, yeah, I can do that. Here's a check. And so you might be surprised that here and there might be able to add up on funding some snacks, so it's not coming out of your pocket or your tiny budget you're already working from. In terms of our parking barrier bottleneck, again, we kind of knew this was an LA challenge. It was expensive parking, and so much so that we did receive some hate mail. Some people were frustrated at the cost, especially knowing it was for people who are in a laid-off situation. When you're doing things, it's going to attract some opinions of it, and that's going to always come with you doing anything. There's going to be a range of people. Some people like it. Some people wish it was done differently. Kind of having to kind of accept that part of it is absorbing some blame, and that's hopefully still the positives outweigh the negatives of the good that you're doing. And some of it's also being just simply empathetic to the fact that when you're trying to help people who are necessarily laid off between work, still trying to find their first footing, and maybe people who are coming from, they're in stressful situations, they are counting on certain things. So being patient with that as you're trying to help people and do all that you can to help the community. that's part of the process and the cost kind of factor into what goes into doing it. In terms of printing, we were very fortunate. Once again, here was a place where our host, Industrious, was able to deliver. They actually offered to do our printing for us. That included like a massive Kinko's-like banner. But as long as you know those things early on of like, potentially our venue might be able to account for some of those services. If you can sort those things out sooner rather than later, you might be able to better take advantage of those kind of opportunities. I think, Drew, some PR and marketing thoughts?
Yeah. Generally, I thought, we were really happy the event seemed to be successful for our size, but we needed to leverage our presence online and all of these things better. We needed to get the messaging out in more different ways. Something that I think people don't often think about. You obviously have Facebook and Instagram or whatever, people or Twitter if people are following you on, but for professional events, LinkedIn is huge. If you're a job seeker, you're on LinkedIn. If you're a recruiter, you're on LinkedIn. So we didn't have our LinkedIn presence up to date at that time, and we didn't really grow it as much as we could have. And if we were to leverage that for our next event, which I hope we can, I think that'll be really powerful. On top of that, there's a lot more data we could have been gathering. That Eventbrite, we funneled things in from Facebook and from Twitter and things like that. If we were to just use backlinks or shorten URLs with data attached to them, we'd absolutely be able to know, okay, most of our traffic is coming from Twitter, so maybe we should spend more effort there. Or it's coming from our mailing list. Let's see how we can grow our mailing list. That kind of thing, just to focus our efforts. Because anytime you're working with nonprofits or small companies or whatever, you kind of get into this space where you're doing a shotgun approach to marketing. And it's a very high effort operation. But if you're able to know which pieces are giving you the value, you can save yourself a lot of time. And honestly, you can be a lot more successful investing in the one thing that's giving you the most outcome.
On the other side of getting people to show up, we kind of knew building into the plans, like any event, not everyone who says they're going to RSVP on Facebook or Eventbrite is actually going to be there. And first off, we just kind of Googled average rate of people who don't show up for Eventbrite. We found about 40 to 50%, which is also consistent with our casual meetups as a chapter we hold anyway, in terms of we might have 20 to 30 shows for an event that 50 people respond yes to. So it seemed to kind of line for expectations.
And so, going off of that, the attendees, getting specific data in advance from the people who say they're coming is really important. We sent out a pre-vetting survey. But the problem is people didn't want to fill it in, or they just put in gibberish or made stuff up, borking our data. Like it would say, like, what do you do for work? Artist, engineer, audio, other. And they'd put like unicorns. And I'm like, that is not a sticker I have in front of me to put on your name tag. And it wasn't until we started parsing that data and looking at some of the charts that Eventbrite generates, I was just like, oh no. Speaking of, oh no, you got to be ready to hold your ground politely and appropriately as people try to push or bully you into comping things that you shouldn't. I'm going to say this right now. It is not industry standard to comp anything at a career fair. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise, whether it's parking or their parking ticket or whatever.
There's a clear management of expectations in terms of, I think our page might even made probably all capitals, like parking is X amount, which is a double-digit expensive amount. We encourage ride shares or public transit, etc. Giving them a heads up helps make it easy if you have to afterwards to point to the thing and be like, you opted to do the thing we let you know. Just kind of helps prevent or reduce and manage as many of those conversations you can have. We did have, in terms of feedback we received, some positive feedback. So we mentioned earlier our friend, the financial advisor, who did not get as many interactions as we were hoping for him during the event. But we did have people hit him up after the event to do their taxes for their company this year. So it's still a worthwhile thing for him to be out there, sharing those business cards, making those connections. We were trying to figure out a better way to get follow-up from our different organizations that were there. We know it was valuable for some of them, but we would love to, this is where we would share some quotes if we had them. Like we said, a lot of them kind of ghosted us on the surveys after the fact. They kind of felt like they built up for an event, they were done, they were exhausted. Granted, they got other priorities to go to next. But working out a way to get that sort of notes from them, just like it's valuable for us to document the event on video and show, look, this is a real thing that happens. Getting those sort of quotes and feedback, we might be trying to find still ways yet to get a hold of them to get some notes of how valuable it was in retrospect. Those help you land new venues next time. Those help you sell the event to other people who might come out. Those are important and worth finding ways to figure out. We have not cracked that puzzle, but we acknowledge that's a thing we are trying to improve at. There were some studios that were unhappy with the clientele we brought in. We might hand wave and say to an extent there's only so much we can control about that. There was one who wanted some very high-level people, but here's a case where even there, we could have managed expectations better if if we had been able to get that company to fill out their pre-survey, where they did not let us know that's who they're looking for until it was sort of already too late.
Managing expectations and stuff is important. And on that note, we actually had a mid-sized studio who really loved us. They were incredibly happy with their experience, and they didn't expect to be so happy with their experience. They not only found who they wanted, but also people they didn't realize they wanted. And they added it to their database later for when they got back to HQ, because they knew they'd be hiring in a couple months for those roles.
Right on. In terms of getting our logistics out, again, we hit up basically every channel we could. We had our town hall a couple months prior, and we really tried to drill in there that this was an important event coming up on the calendar. So it can be an opportunity to kind of basically build up to that event. So by the time it's coming up, people are asking about, when's that going on? I heard that's a thing that's happening. And we did see some of that response on our Facebook event, which I think was helpful to us. We didn't charge people. Again, our context here was this, we were mostly trying to create this to help people who were laid off. That said, there is some sort of trade-offs between if you charge even a nominal amount, maybe $3, maybe $5. We have some internal dialogues about if it makes sense for us to do it for our next one. Obviously, you're going to get fewer respondents, but you might have a much higher rate of people who feel like, I paid for this, I'm going to show up. And you might have a much better, therefore, hit rate on promising your attendee or your company's coming, who's going to be there based on they paid for it, they're probably going to be here, even if it's not a huge amount. For volunteers, it's good to ask them at least a month in advance, even if they're people who are not necessarily specialists with a camera or other kinds of certain work. It's still a case, even if it's something you could be doing, but a volunteer could do it instead, that frees you up to do work that they might not be able to take care of based on who they know there, who they invited there, stuff that you have the authority as the person facilitating or administering it to take care of. I've got a couple notes from, I think, David on pre-recording some email correspondences.
Yeah, it's important to have a good communications plan when you're holding an event like this. And so it helps to plan out what emails you're going to send and write them out well ahead of time, because you find when you're preparing for an event like this, you don't have time to think about these things. So plan out your emails ahead of time. Like write an email to send out to thank people when they signed up. Then maybe another one 5 days or a week before, 10 or 14 days before, and then a 24 hours before the event. Just continual reminders so that people don't forget about it and to build up the anticipation for the event.
A note I want to add about those pre-scheduling the emails.
Don't forget about it and to build up the anticipation for the event.
A note I want to add about those pre-scheduling the emails is so important because you'll be exhausted. You'll be scrambling just before it. You'll be tired right after it. If you've written them a few weeks in advance, it may not seem fun or easy to do, but it lets you not stress out about it at the time, and the emails will still go out.
Yeah, and the same way that you want to schedule stuff beforehand and send out emails to prep people, it's really helpful to send one out afterwards, just a thank you to people, make sure the last interaction is positive, and kind of keep up that relationship for the next time, if it's a recruiter or whatever, the next time you're hosting an event, when you need to contact them again. And that's also a great opportunity to kind of share some of the data that you've gathered at this point and provide extra value back to these people, whether it's the venue or telling them who showed up, or recruiters giving them a list of the candidates, et cetera.
And, there's some sort of nuts and bolts technical stuff as well in terms of verbiage, strategy, timing, all that. Make sure you fit your venue. We've said it over and over and over again. The venue is going to be the most important thing.
Right on. Well, and for closing, I want to encourage, we'll put our email addresses up, how to contact us in the chapter for IGDA. If you have questions about it, we'd love to discuss them with you. If you have tips, opportunities, better ways to fund things, better kind of venues to look for, we are, as much as anything, not just trying to say this is how it's done. We're trying to create that conversation and learn from you as well. And your experiences, it would really benefit us as we are continuing to try to run career fairs as well. I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. And also thank you, of course, David, Dru, and Tiffany. I'm Chris. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
And we are going to roll right into our next talk, making a healthy social impact.